Hey, it's Zach, and the NFL playoffs are winding down, which means draft talk is heating up. Check out Mel Kiper Jr., Todd McShay, and Field Yates on the First Draft podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast, where before we bring on the great Kevin Arnovitz to discuss the new look Brooklyn Nets, and James Harden and Kyrie Irving, and some other interesting trends around the league, let's pour one out for one of the NBA diehards' favorite teams, the Portland Trail Blazers, who in the last week have lost two of their three best players to injury. Yusuf Nurkic has a broken wrist. He's out a couple of months. And CJ McCollum, who was absolutely lighting the world on fire, 27 points a game, that's a career high. 5 assists a game, that's a career high on 47% shooting. Lighting the world on fire. Suffered a hairline fracture in his foot. He will be reevaluated in 4 weeks. And CJ is a fan favorite. He's a favorite of mine. He has one of the deepest bags of tricks in the entire NBA. Step backs, floaters with both hands, bank shots, teardrops. The guy is the trickiest, craftiest mid-range player, or at least one of them, in the entire league. I still remember him putting a very old Dirk Nowitzki on skates and making him fall over and feeling very bad for Dirk. Look, there's a good chance that both of these guys are back well in time for the playoffs and get in shape and all that we'll still see this peak Blazers team. And look, the Blazers are not profiling as a championship contender right now. They're 8-6. They're 26 in defense. They cannot stop anybody. But we also just haven't gotten a chance to see anything close to this team. Nurkic took 6 or 7 games to even look like himself. Covington and Derrick Jones Jr. in the starting 5 were just sort of starting to find themselves, or still just starting to find themselves. We haven't seen a ton of chemistry from that lineup yet. Zach Collins is injured again. So, they don't look like they're lighting the world on fire, but there's a really good team in here somewhere, and it just makes me sad that we're not going to be able to see it for a little while. And, that really is the story of the Blazers, though, and one of the reasons this team is near and dear to my heart. Ironically, CJ McCollum only got a real chance to play for the Blazers when Wesley Matthews tore his Achilles in 2015. When the Blazers were with Aldridge and Dame and West at the peak of his powers, were kind of a little bit of a dark horse contender, certainly a team nobody really wanted to play. And then, of course, that injury undid their season. LaMarcus Aldridge left in free agency. They lost in the first round, and then LaMarcus Aldridge was a Spur. But zoom out, this team, they lost Greg Oden. They lost Brandon Roy for nothing. Injuries just derailed their careers. And the story of the Blazers is that they have fought and fought and fought. And really, despite all of these setbacks, LaMarcus leaving for nothing, they just keep winning. They really only had 2 down years in this sort of recent year. 2012, they draft Dame after the Nets traded them a first-round pick, and their GM said there were only 3 good players in the draft, so they didn't care because it was a top 3 protected pick. Whoops. Next year, they were bad again. They drafted CJ McCollum. Every year after that, they've been good. Not great, but really, really good. It's actually fitting that this news broke on the same day that the Pacers announced that Miles Turner would be day-to-day with an avulsion fracture. Jeremy Lamb's already out for them. And, of course, they just traded Victor Oladipo for Karis LeVert. Prayers up for Karis LeVert. They found a mass on his kidney because the Blazers and the Pacers, the parallels are pretty eerie. Small market teams, not free agent destinations, teams that don't tank, teams that just win consistently. And, yeah, the Blazers have never advanced to the finals in this era. Never look like a real title contender in this era, but they're good every season, and there's a certain honor in that. We tend to analyze it as you either are competing for the championship, you either win a ring or you're a loser, and that's just not real life for most NBA teams. And if you look at their playoff record, it's on the surface it's not amazing, but they lost to the eventual champion in 2014, the Spurs in the second round, 2017, the Warriors in the second round, last season to the Lakers in the first round. They also lost to the 73-win Warriors, who I think everyone thought was going to win the championship, and then the 2019 Warriors in the conference finals, who everyone thought was going to win the championship. I think that year, the Durant was out that series, then Clay got hurt in the finals. Look, and the Warriors sort of fell a little bit, and the LA teams rose a little bit in the West. That's life in the West. That 2019 conference finals appearance is interesting. The year before, the Pelicans swept Portland in the first round. Portland was the 3rd seed and just got obliterated. Paul Allen came into their locker room after that sweep, after game 4, and said that they had failed and that it was unacceptable. Everyone in that locker room, people told me when I went to Portland, said when Paul Allen said that to them, they were worried about Terry Stotts. They were worried about trades. They were worried that something was going to break up the team. And frankly, a loss like that coming off a a loss to the Warriors the year before, and all the losses we've been talking about, mostly to the Warriors, that's a moment that breaks a team. And it didn't break the Blazers. I think that's one of the great things about this team. It did not break the Blazers. The players fought for Terry Stotts. They went to ownership. They went to the front office and said, this is the guy we want to be our coach. When he became third all-time in wins for the Blazers, CJ McCollum bought him an $1,800 bottle of wine. It's a pretty nice bottle of wine. And they made the Western Conference Finals the next year. They stayed together. They made the Conference Finals the next year. That's the year Dame waved goodbye to Oklahoma City. And they made the Conference Finals. Now, you might look and say, well, that's just a fluky Western Conference Finals berth. Who cares? They got swept. They got swept by the Warriors. Didn't even have Durant. Swept them. That's the series that Portland had the lead, I think, in every single game. And they got swept. So who cares? Western Conference Finals. And not only that, the draw was a little bit, like once you got by Oklahoma City. By the way, everybody picked Oklahoma City to win that series. They got Denver in the second round. Untested, young. No one really believed in the Nuggets. So, is it really that impressive that Portland made the Western Conference Finals? Ask the Clippers. Ask literally every single person who has ever played for or worked for the Los Angeles Clippers franchise how easy it is to make the Western Conference Finals. It's not easy. I don't care what your draw is. I don't care what your circumstances are. That year coming off the Pelican sweep, that is something to be proud of. You don't think Portland fans cherish that run to the conference finals? You don't think they cherish when CJ McCollum put the team on his back in Game 7 in Denver in the second round? 37 points on 17 of 29 shooting. Go back and watch that game. Damian Lillard had 13 points and was completely exhausted. That was the series that featured a quadruple overtime game where Nikola Jokic, who does not exactly at that point anyway, looked like the guy in the best shape on the floor, played 60-something minutes. Dame was totally exhausted, and CJ carried them over the finish line. 3 jumpers in the last 2.5 minutes of the game or so, and they come to the Western Conference Finals. It's not easy to get there, and it was a great year. And yeah, they didn't win, but Portland fans would not trade that year for a whole lot. In Portland, all you can do every year is try to give yourself a puncher's chance to get one break, one injury away. You're not going to get a glamour free agent. This team's not going to draft high in the draft unless they tank, which they haven't really done. Did they nail every single fringe move in building this team? And that's how we judge these teams in non-glamour markets. You got to make the most out of every trade. You got to get 2 second-rounders here, steal a second-rounder. Maybe not. They splurged on Evan Turner and Allen Crabbe. Digging out of those deals was hurtful a little bit. Their drafting is okay to good, but not great. But guess what? When you draft in the 20s most of the time, your drafting is going to be okay and not great. They did draft Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum when they had chances to pick high. They deserve a lot of credit for that. And by the way, when they splurged on Evan Turner and Allen Crabbe, everybody had cap space. It's not like they had a lot of great alternatives for using that cap space. But for years and years, the Blazers have built consistently good teams around likable personalities. Did they build a team this year when they went all in, or their version of all in by trading 2 first-round picks for Robert Covington and signing Derrick Jones for a lot of money? Did they build a puncher's chance team? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, they're certainly not in the Lakers-Clippers stratosphere, but the actualized version of that team, particularly if you added Zach Collins, that's an interesting team. Yusuf Nurkic is really good. CJ McCollum is really good. Probably they would have something a little less than a puncher's chance. The most likely outcome for the Blazers, as long as they are built around 2 small guards who make a whole lot of money, make up a whole lot of the salary cap, is to be a good team, but not a championship team. And maybe that's okay. Maybe one year everything clicks and they'll get a little lucky. Someone will take an injury. Doesn't look like this is going to be that kind of year for them. Doesn't look like they'll ever get that kind of year. It's unlikely they'll ever get that kind of year. But maybe we'll at least get lucky and have a chance to see the fully actualized version of these Blazers play in the playoffs, or at least by the end of the year. I hope so, because I think there's a really good team in there, and there is honor in the NBA in being good, even if you are never great. So pour one out for the Blazers and a beloved player in CJ McCollum and a really good player in Yusuf Nurkic. Let's hope we see those guys back soon. And now let's bring in Mr. Arnovitz to talk about all things NBA. How are you, Mr. Arnovitz?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I know you're well. Out there in Los Angeles where it's nice and sunny every day. We are good. I'm good. I don't care if it's grammatically incorrect. I am good. I am hanging in. Let's talk about the Brooklyn Nets, who squeaked out a very exciting and fun win over the Milwaukee Bucks, 125-123 at home in front of a raucous Brooklyn Nets crowd. Actually, it doesn't sound that much different than a normal Brooklyn Nets crowd at Barclays Center, I don't think. It was James Harden's second game with the Nets after last week's mega trade. 0 of those games have come with Kyrie Irving, who continues to be MIA, even though there are rumblings he's going to play every game and then he doesn't end up playing. They looked pretty damn good offensively and pretty damn vulnerable defensively, but they're now 2-0 with Mr. Harden. What are your first impressions, Mr. Arnovitz?
My first impressions are somewhat obvious, which is this is a really good offensive team. And even watching Harden, it's a different role. And part of that is he doesn't come in as the incumbent, so he's going to be asked to do different things. I think he's going to enjoy being asked to dazzle as a playmaker. He's always created for others in the sense that, I'm leveraging the defense and the attention paid to me, and okay, there are opportunities out there. But there's a difference between just finding guys and looking for them. And you forget, like, James Harden is a really good passing playmaker. It was, and yet he's also James Harden. That very first play, Drew's pressuring him up, which makes all the sense in the world because you have Lopez out there. That's what having a Lopez dropping lets you do, is it allows your perimeter defenders to put more pressure on a guy like Harden. But he just kind of rumbles and does that off-speed pitch. He banks it off the glass before Lopez can even make this real contest. I loved the small pick and rolls they're running for Harden and Harris. I mean, that's something that I don't think James has done a lot of, running stuff with more stated purpose and design and with greater frequency than he used to. And then, okay, there's the defensive question, and we've all asked that. And I think we all can see that Jared Allen was probably the better player at this point in time than DeAndre Jordan. But I also believe that DeAndre Jordan can be better than he's been of late. I think at his peak, Jordan was an all-NBA rim protector with elite mobility and elite athleticism. But you know what? He can still be an excellent rim protector with very good mobility and athleticism. And I think, there's always this sort of, your sense of justice in terms of the NBA is always violated a little. A guy can act like an ass somewhere, get himself dealt to where he wants to go, and then all of a sudden is reborn as this, willing team player, and it shouldn't be that way. He should play like that all the time. Even DeAndre, he's been dogging it a little bit, but all of a sudden now there's something to play for, and he's certainly not the old DeAndre Jordan just by function of age, but he's in terms of desire and function very much that guy. And I don't think their depth is they gave up a lot of depth. All of a sudden Jeff Green is this sort of modern four that works on many levels. I think they're getting really good. Look, the shooting will come and go, but I think Bruce Brown is a very capable defender and a guy that, as a third or fourth guard kind of works. And, TLC, Shamet, like it's not awful. I mean, I think up front, there are going to be nights where they'll need more depth than they want more depth than they probably have. But I say that about all these really good teams. I mean, we have concerns about the Bucks depth. We have concerns about the Sixers depth. We have concerns about the Celtics depth. Depth is a funny thing in the league, and it's really a matter of sort of cultivating guys who don't seem to be giving you depth. And all of a sudden, that's a dude who can play 16 minutes a night and not only survive, but provide something specific when there's a specific need. So anyway, I'm kind of bullish on them. And they might potentially be annoying just from a narrative standpoint, but I can find fault, but I want to see, and I kind of am liking what I see from their perspective.
DJ is interesting. Obviously, the spotlight's going to be on him now because Jared Allen's gone. They don't have, Reggie. They do have another center, Reggie Perry. They clearly trust. They were raving about him in preseason, but there's going to be a ton of responsibility on DJ. You mentioned the rim protection. I actually think there are two more elements of DJ's game that I'm almost more interested in than that. Number one is how much of a vertical threat is he on offense still? How much of a lob catcher can he be? And the timing has been a little off with Dinwiddie since Dinwiddie got there and DJ got there. Dinwiddie's obviously gone. The timing was a little bit off last night. But is he an explosive vertical threat on offense as he was even near the degree to which he was with the Clippers? I always thought he was an underrated offensive player, even though he could only do one thing. That thing is super duper valuable. He's not quite that athletic. He's not quite that dangerous. But with this particular team and the amount of space he's going to have, I think he needs to be a sound threat in that regard. And I think he probably still has some of that in him. The other thing is the rebounding. Because if there's defense is a lot of things, but one of the things defense is finishing possessions. And this is a bad rebounding team. They were a bad rebounding team before this trade. And DJ is, and Durant is the same way too. They have a lot of guys who are just I hope it comes to me rebounders. They're not box out rebounders. They're not really go up and get it rebounders. DJ is the greatest rebound thief of all time. He'll go up and get it and steal
Marcus
from his own
Camby.
guys.
Marcus Camby.
Ooh, that's
and he learned from Camby. That's the funny thing.
That's true. But he's not a box out guy. And you saw like one of the reasons Bruce Brown is going to be a valuable player for this team is Bruce Brown is an elite rebounding guard. And you saw it last night. He got in there and he got some gang rebounds, and they're going to have to rebound well enough to survive. But I think, look, I was bullish on this idea of them trading for Harden. I was a little squeamish about the depth they were going to give up, and they did end up giving up. And I'm squeamish anytime you give up every pick in perpetuity. But I was bullish about the offense. And we haven't seen Kyrie yet, and that's going to be interesting. But I think with Kyrie, this offense is, everyone says, oh, the offense is going to be great. I think it's going to be on par with the Warriors with Durant as basically the greatest offense of all time. I just don't think there's anything, when they have Durant, Harden, Kyrie, Harris, and just pick Jordan, Jeff Green, whatever, I just don't think there's really anything you can do unless you have, and we even saw with the Bucks have like a bunch of good switchy defenders. They really couldn't do anything. And by the way, when are we going to just not have Giannis on Jeff Green in these games? When is Giannis going to take on some of these big-time assignments in some of these games? Is that in the playoffs, if these two teams meet in the Eastern Conference and Giannis is over there on Jeff Green and Chris Middleton is trying to check Kevin Durant and then Dante DiVincenzo is trying to check Kevin Durant on switches, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm tired of it. Put him on Kevin Durant. Like for 5 possessions, put him on Kevin Durant. Just 5. Anyway, I just think.
Yeah, what's the theory, Zach? Is the theory that he's such a dangerous help defender playing the
Yeah, that's it. He's a help defender.
You'd rather rove?
Yeah, that's it. Put him on Jeff Green. Jeff Green's a non-threat in the corner. Giannis can muck stuff up. That's cool. You can muck stuff up. You know what you can't really muck up? Kevin Durant going against a dude who can't guard him. There's no mucking that up. The only way you muck that up is throw 2 and 3 guys at him, and then he's passing to Joe Harris and Kyrie Irving and James Harden, and you're done. And we've already seen, you mentioned the James Harden, Joe Harris pick and roll last night. They play right away, it's clear. Even without Kyrie, Bryn Forbes, you're dead. DJ Augustine, you're dead. If you're an undersized bad defender, you are not going to be able to play against this team when they have their guys on the floor. But think about like James Harden, DJ pick and roll with Joe Harris and Kyrie on one side, setting flare screens and switching places, and Durant as the single side guy on the weak side, the guy you're quote unquote supposed to help off of in that situation. What are you even going to do? I think offensively, this team, pending Kyrie buying into whatever kind of role he's going to buy in, is just going to be unstoppable on not just a great level, on a maybe the greatest offense in history level. And then the only question after that is, let's just leave the West aside for a second. Who in the East has an offense that really, really scares you when you talk about the defensive vulnerabilities of the Nets? Who is the team that has the pieces on offense like, oh my God, how are we going to survive with Kyrie and James on the floor? Maybe it's Milwaukee. Milwaukee's got some interesting pieces, but the Nets outscored them last night. It's not Philly. Boston, I mean, Boston has the pieces to guard these guys with Smart, Tatum, and Brown. Offensively, I'm not sure they're quite scary enough unless Peak Kemba really comes back and everyone gets rolling at the same time. Then they're interesting. Philly, no. And Miami is, we'll talk about them later. They're a complete mess right now. I mean, I think this team, I'd pick them by a hair over the Bucks right now, I think, is the favorites in the East. I just think they're going to be really, really good.
I'm in the same place. I have them over the Bucks slightly, and maybe that's informed by, I don't know, this notion I think we have that as good as it is, as well honed as the machine is for 6.5 months, they still haven't done advanced problem solving against really good defenses, and you could argue, okay, the Nets don't offer that. But even the sort of load up last night against Giannis, who clearly was frustrated. By the way, I know we're not talking Bucks today.
Talk Bucks.
A couple of nights ago, I texted to a friend in Milwaukee and said, Middleton needs to see the ball and needs to touch it on crucial possessions in the closing minutes of important games. And this, I think, was against Dallas. And last night, that was sort of born. I am such a Chris Middleton guy right now. I put him second team All NBA ahead of Tatum last season. Thought about it again. kind of really dug in and said yes. And then there's this notion that he's not an alpha guy, which just bothers me. Like this thing in the league where if your eyes are droopy and you're not staring at the opposing bench when you hit a three, or you speak with a Charleston drawl, and my entire family speaks with a Charleston drawl, so I say this personally, that somehow you're not a killer. You look at that guy's postseason stats. And I think just look at some of the exploits. I know that was a 3-0 game against Miami, and that was just sort of a gentleman's win. I know that Giannis still attracts the gravity that he does, but I'm just kind of really enjoying the Chris Middleton experience right now. But you're right. I mean, I think I have Brooklyn as a hair just because we still haven't seen that advanced problem solving with which essentially comes down to, I don't care what you're throwing at Giannis Antetokounmpo in language that you use, you're dead. You load up, you're dead. You play it straight, or you play the action 1-on-1, you're dead. And I just don't, until we see that from Milwaukee. And I think, by the way, we could. In the evolution of any team that ever got to that point, there was a point where they just kind of sputtered or couldn't figure it out. And I do think this is a team still on the upward trajectory of kind of self-actualization, particularly with Drew in there now. And I just think the decision making is going to be better. And I just think Middleton, to me, has found a level of confidence where on nights when Giannis doesn't have it, like, this is a guy who can carry a really good team in the last 5 minutes of a game.
He's ascended as a shooter to territory. Yeah. Like, you're just scared every single shot is going in. Remember last year he missed 50, 40, 90 he shot 49.7% from the field. You should have done the Ted Williams. Well, Ted Williams didn't do this, right? The thing where you're batting 400 and you just sit out the rest of the games. It's like, that's what I would do. If I were a baseball player and I were batting 400, I'd be like, oh, I'm done. I'm out. As long as I have the at-bats to qualify, I'm out. That's what Middleton should have done. Well, this year, he's 53%, 44% from three, 93% at the line, building a nice little early season cushion at the line, which normally is the one that gets people, the 90. And he's just really, really good. And to your point, a very astute observation, Kevin, about Middleton getting the ball late in the game last night. I wonder if whenever the playoffs are happening, if the Bucks are, no matter what the Bucks are doing, if we're going to remember last night's game as a little bit of I'm not going to say turning point, but just a little bit of a marker for people who follow this stuff closely. And I'll tell you why. Giannis last night set 36 ball screens. That means he was the screener on 36 Milwaukee pick and rolls. His previous high in any game for the last 2 seasons combined was 21.
You're kidding.
And I wrote, this is
unbelievable.
This is second spectrum tracking data. So I wrote last week in my 10 things that I was surprised they hadn't been using Giannis more as a screener, because when they got Holiday, a real knifing point guard who was a threat both to shoot and to drive, that's one of the things they would try to weaponize, and they hadn't done it yet. I think one of the reasons they did it last night is when other teams stick their centers on Giannis, like the Nets did with DeAndre Jordan, and just say, hang back in the paint, the easiest pivot, and the one I've been waiting for them to make even more often, is, okay, just use Giannis as a screener. Nobody's within 10 feet of him. Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, you get around that pick, you have nothing but daylight. 36 ball screens for Giannis. Maybe second spectrum mistracked this, I don't know, but the reason I looked it up is because I was watching the game thinking, oh my God, he's setting a lot of ball screens. I think that the actualized championship version of Giannis is closer to Anthony Davis and further from LeBron James than the current version of Giannis. That doesn't mean he becomes Anthony Davis and is just not a ball handler anymore. I don't mean that. I just think on that long continuum between creator and finisher, and Anthony Davis is way more than a finisher. Obviously, I'm being a little rote. He moves a little bit along the scale to screener, finisher. And I just wonder if last night's game, I wonder how he enjoyed it. I wonder how he felt it flowed, because I think that's a really important element of his game. And one of the reasons that they got Drew Holiday was to give another pick and roll ball handler that Giannis could screen for, that if you switch, you're dead. If you go under, you're not dead, because Drew will have some cold shooting nights, but it could be a problem. If you go over and play traditional defense, you open up pocket passes to Giannis and all sorts of problems. I just wonder if we're going to look back at this game, the diehards at least, and say, that was a little bit of a flashbulb kind of game.
Yeah, and look, that was a stated desire of Milwaukee coming into the season. You had conversations. What do you guys? What's on the to-do list? This was a question I love asking. In preseason, and it was A, employing him that way, and also B, getting him touches closer in. Giannis. To your point about kind of AD versus LeBron. I don't know that in a half court setting I want him as frequently at the top of the floor unless there's a real matchup or scheme to exploit.
I don't. And that's the point of the ball screen thing. When you put a center on him, I'd rather have him set screens and just drive into Joel Embiid 100 times in a game.
Yeah. And that is something. And by the way, it's going to take time. Like, I think, look, he clearly doesn't need to be sold on it that much. And it's funny because, Bud is one of these guys where, hey, I'd rather have dental surgery than have a really prominent post game in my offense. And yet we saw last season, hey, Brook has opportunities. And so they got a little more comfortable with it. And now it's sort of Giannis, like that paint is going to be occupied by offensive players, who are not on a drive more frequently than I think the initial design of the scheme really wanted or called for. And I think this is sort of, again, if the knock against Milwaukee is they're too orthodox, these things that work wonders in the regular season. There's an obstinance there and intransigence against adjustment. I think they've gotten the message. I think there's an acknowledgement that, hey, yes, we aren't that far, but B, that final distance over the Rubicon is going to require more adjustment, by the way, defensively and offensively, right? Like, you just can't climb the wall every night. You can't, especially in the playoffs, especially against good defensive teams. And especially, when size is an issue. And especially, frankly, when the stop on a dime pull up is a bad option, which is, for Giannis, until further notice, a bad option.
I'll tell you, though, he made a couple of jump hooks last night, and they don't look great. And some of them come from further away than I would like my jump hooks to come. But you can tell that's a shot he's been working on. And every time I watch the Bucks, I pay attention, say, how many jump hooks do we see? How does his jump hook look? How does he get into it? How's his footwork? Does he almost travel? Did he travel and they didn't call it? Made a couple last night. That's a shot. That's a shot I'm muttering. We have breaking news that's relevant to our current conversation, Kevin. Are you ready?
What?
Grab your chair. I just want you to grab both arms of your chair. I don't want you to get injured. I don't want you to get overexcited. I don't want you to fall over. We're getting old. We don't need a back injury on this podcast. This is very exciting, unexpected, earth-shattering news. Are you ready?
Yes.
Steve Nash expects Kyrie Irving, basketball player, to play basketball tomorrow night when the Nets face the Cleveland Cavaliers.
That's news.
So let me ask you this existential question that is unanswerable, and it's unfair for me to even ask it. And because it's unfair for me to even ask it, I will also answer it after you answer it, because I am nothing if not an altruistic, fair host. Would you rather have the Nets' current team, or would you have rather traded Kyrie Irving and, let's say, 2 unprotected first-round picks and a swap for James Harden?
Okay, so let me just take inventory. So you're now retaining 2 of the 4 that you sent out in one of the 2 swaps? There were 2 swaps.
Yeah, something like that.
All right.
Maybe maybe I've got to trade LeVert too. I don't know. Kyrie's trade value. I mean, I don't know even how to quantify Kyrie Irving's trade value right now. No one does, but it would have taken a hell of a. I mean, I don't think Houston was interested in Kyrie anyway, but to get them interested would have taken some draft pick inventory, among other things. So I don't know what the theoretical deal is, but I guess what I'm saying is Harden plus depth plus half the picks at least versus the big 3.
Right. And so 2 disclaimers as I answer the question in the affirmative. Yeah, I would have rather dealt Irving. Is number one, I don't know what is going on in the guy's life, and I don't want this to be an expression of or an indictment of what might be going on in a guy's life. We get asked about this a lot. I reserve judgment. I just do.
No, it's an impossible. I talked about it on the jump last week. It's impossible. Like, we've all needed mental health breaks in our life. I don't know.
Yeah, and so I just kind of I recuse myself from those conversations. Secondly, I also want to say I don't believe necessarily in there's redundant talent of shot creation at a certain point, because I'm not totally sold on that theory. That said, I think there's enough to the depth question. Again, I mean, Perry might be capable. I would like Allen. I would like a guy on nights where, frankly, Irving sits, or, you want to start tapering Harden, but you're still chasing the 1 seed. I want LeVert. I like that depth. I feel comfortable with that depth. And I'd rather, and certainly when you come to the inventory, I mean, you're making it easy in some respects, with retaining 2 and 1 on the unprotected picks and the swap. So I would have dealt Kyrie.
Well, Harden and Durant are just that good. I mean, they're 2 of the top 6 players in the league, 7 at worst. If you want to really factor in Harden's postseason bed pooping into the evaluation, maybe he falls to 7th or 8th or something like that. But they're just that dynamic offensively. Now, the diminishing returns thing is interesting. There is diminishing returns in ball handling to some degree. There are no diminishing returns in shooting. And that's why I think this team offensively with the big 3 is going to be as powerful or more powerful than any offense in the history of the league. And the common denominator between them, of course, is Durant. And I think part of Durant's legacy will be, not only is he one of the greatest individual players of all time, he might be the greatest amplifier of other talent in the history of the NBA among superstar ball handler types. Now, Steph is that kind of player too, but KD with his size and versatility can do absolutely everything. And I think part of his legacy in the league will be, this was the one guy you could stick on any kind of super team with any kind of players, and he makes everyone around him better without taking away anything on either end of the floor. And I think that's really something for him to be proud of in his track record. But so to answer my own question, look, I would rather have the depth and just Harden and Durant than the current team they have, for lots and lots of reasons that are all obvious. The one caveat is the third star gives you insurance against an injury to one of the other 2. I just don't think you can make that the driver of all your decision making and all your judgment of a scenario like this. I don't think if injuries I just don't think you can plan life around injuries and insurance for injuries and all of that. So I do think there is sort of safety in numbers in that regard. I'd rather have the depth and the picks in Harden and KD. I don't think the other scenario was really on the table. I just think it is in question. That said, I am optimistic about how this is going to work offensively with all 3 of them. And as I said last week, this is how I put it, and I think it's even more clear now, even without Kyrie playing. Whose team is it? I think it's Kevin Durant's team and James Harden's offense. And Kyrie Irving is going to have to find a way to exist in that world. Good news for Kyrie Irving. The team's going to score 120 points every night. So you're going to roll out of the bed, hop onto the court, and walk into 25 points, even if you're not the guy, even if you're not the number 2 option when all 3 of them are on the floor. The numbers are going to be there, but that's the way I conceive of the team. And I'm even more sort of convinced that's the way it's going to play out, having seen them play twice, even without Kyrie.
Yeah, and your amplification point is really interesting, and largely because, Durant is a ball-dominant scorer, but that guy does a lot off the ball offensively for you, which is, again, I mean, I think theoretically you could say the same thing about LeBron and these other elite players and Giannis for that matter to a certain extent. But I just don't think there's a firm appreciation for second side pin down monster that will completely leverage everything that you are doing defensively, because there's no proper response to that, especially if you have lethal combinations on the first side of the floor. That's the funny thing about the second side of the floor. The answer is, yeah, but what's on the first side of the floor? And if the answer is, James Harden doing Hardenish things, or for that matter, Kyrie doing Kyrie handle things, then it's just devastating. And I think that's kind of, I'm regaining an appreciation for Durant because, look, I think the static in Golden State was, clear. There were some identity issues. There was some discontent. He revealed sort of unappealing sides of his persona. But like this year, I'm sort of really kind of falling back into, this guy is a freak, and we haven't fully acknowledged it in a while, what it's like to be 7 feet tall with that skill set. And again, not just a ball dominant skill set, but the ability to just completely scramble a defense on all 5 positions. There's no one who doesn't have to account for some form or fashion for Kevin Durant coming off a back screen, or rather a down screen. And like there just isn't that too, but there just isn't a proper response to that. It is not something you can defend.
One more thing on that. The return of Kyrie Irving, who, as we're speaking right now, according to Malika Andrews, is apologizing for his absence, saying he had some personal things to deal with. So welcome back to the fold, Kyrie, one of the all-time great scorers, ball handlers. One of the great shows in the NBA is going to make this team absolutely ridiculous. On offense is now Steve Nash has a decision to make with his starting 5. Obviously, Kyrie's going to start. Harden, Durant, DJ, unless they get really bold, which I don't think they will. That means that one of Joe Harris and Jeff Green is going to come off the bench. And I think the natural assumption would be Joe Harris is a perfect fit with those 3 guys. I mean, a shooter. You just talked about the Harden, Joe Harris pick and roll that was giving Milwaukee all kinds of problems last night. I think the natural assumption would be that Joe Harris would start and Jeff Green would come off the bench and be the backup power forward. There's only 2 power forwards on this team anymore between Durant and Jeff Green. And the only thing I'll say about that is Joe Harris mysteriously came off the bench for 2 or 3 games a couple of weeks ago and like 6 iterations of the Nets ago. And so I don't know the answer, but just that fact alone suggests to me that it's not a complete fait accompli that Jeff Green comes off the bench. We'll see. Either way, these discussions, I think we sort of overdo sometimes. They're going to have 3 or 4 finishing lineups. They're all going to be awesome. And that's it for the Nets. They're going to be great. They're going to be a great show. I hope everybody stays healthy and safe. All right, Kay, you want to talk about a few teams that have gone under the radar a little bit this year?
I love the underpublicized squads.
Let's talk about a squad that's near and dear to our heart. Let's put like 8 minutes on the clock because I don't want to do any more than that. The Memphis Grizzlies, without Jaren Jackson Jr. for the whole season, without Ja Morant for most of the season, are somehow 7-6. They are 25th in offense and fourth in defense.
A throwback. Now, the old grit and grind average them out.
So I want to understand what the hell is going on here and how this team is winning games. But let me just undercut the whole discussion before we even start by saying, here are their 7 wins. Are you ready for their 7 wins, Mr. Arnovitz?
Mm-hmm.
Brooklyn without either Durant or Irving. Charlotte. Brooklyn again without either Durant or Irving. Cleveland without Sexland. Both members of Sexland, and you prudish Cleveland Cavaliers embrace Sexland. I'm going to give you for it every podcast. Minnesota with Karl Anthony Towns. Minnesota stinks anyway. It doesn't matter. Well, it matters, but Philadelphia without Joel Embiid. And then Phoenix full squad last night. So all I'm saying is it's not the most impressive 7-6 start in the history of the NBA. But given their talent, given their injuries, Valanciunas is now in the health and whatever protocol. Morant has just come back for the last 2 games. It doesn't quite look totally Morant-y yet. You see glimpses of it. I still think it's impressive they're 7-6. What's caught your eye about the frisky, feel-good, plucky, growling Memphis Grizzlies?
Well, obviously everybody likes to hear about defense, right? But look, the squads assembled last year, new coaching staff. Number 1 on the agenda is we are going to work on a base defense. Year 1, right? You were responsible, in ISO for sort of guarding pick and rolls 1-on-1, right? We're going to play drop. We will eventually introduce some thoughtful tweaks, but opposing shot profile is going to be the standard. How do you defend 1-on-1, pick and roll actions? I don't care against whom. By the way, that might determine some of your playing time and in responsibility. And then year 2, like here we are, 4th in defense. And yeah, I acknowledge everything you're saying, right? These are wins against very compromised offensive teams, but it's still the NBA. I have no pretense that they are a contending team anytime soon. And I think they're outsiders in sort of a 7 through 10 race, though they're clearly situated themselves as insiders. But okay, what are you doing? How are you adding pressure against dynamic pick and roll combos with the understanding that 1-on-1 doesn't always work? Can you execute a switch situationally? They're great at playing the gaps, which is really fun because they're young and athletic, and it creates great plays for really fun players like Ja Morant.
They're They're third in forcing turnovers, which I think for not bad, but for rebuilding young athletic teams, that's so we've seen it with the Cavs, right? Like that's although they're big guys, the Cavs big guys. I mean, Nance and Andre Drummond should go rob a bank or something. They're stealing everything left and right. They should start a pickpocketing crew, although there's nobody on the streets anymore. But I think that's an easy way to sort of leverage what you have as a young, frisky team and get yourself some easy buckets for an offense that doesn't get a lot of easy buckets.
Right. And then, but look, I'm waiting for what everybody's waiting for, which is Morant / Jackson being the foundation of a really interesting offense with useful players. By the way, speaking of useful players, welcome back, Kyle Anderson. It took him a lot longer, I think, to come back from that surgery than both he and the team.
I love slow-mo. I love slow-mo.
I think you and I have similar taste in guys like that and sort of.
I don't understand it. DL I could understand because somehow the plumper he got, the more effective he was.
The David
Kyle
Wells
Anderson,
rule, yes.
Yeah, that's a good one. Kyle Anderson moves around on the floor, and I think part of his power is that the other players don't understand it either. He's they expect him to be somewhere, but he's moving so slowly. He hasn't completed that Euro step yet, so they're ahead of him. And I don't understand how anything. And he's shooting threes this year. He's shooting 33% on 4 attempts a game, which for slow-mo is progress.
Yeah, and can I use another baseball metaphor? It is Charlie Huff. It is what the hell am I supposed to do with this? It operates at a completely different speed and velocity and motion pattern than anything else we're seeing in an NBA game.
Wait. No one under 35 knows who Charlie Huff is.
I don't give a shit about people under 35 anymore. This is my new creed.
In my memory, as a young person watching baseball, Charlie Huff, by the end of his career, looked like my grandfather had somehow become a major league. Was he that old or was I just that young? To me, he looked like, how did this 65-year-old guy make a major league baseball team?
All right, I'm actually looking it up. He's 73 now, and I feel like he's only been out of the league for a year. So he was. I mean, this is great. He was born in 48. He's actually 2 weeks older than my dad, and he played until 94. Yes, the man was 46 years old.
He looked like he was 60. Anyway, slow-mo, I don't understand. Was Charlie Huff a knuckleballer? In my head,
he was the ultimate knuckleballer.
Okay. Well, the Negros to me were the ultimate knuckleballers. Phil Necro and Joe Necro, were those the Negros? Anyway, Absolutely. It doesn't matter anymore. I don't even know. Oh, slow-mo. I mean, the thing about the Grizzlies is they're not really getting crazy performances from any of the guys that are filling these minutes for Morant and Jackson. Really, it's their rookies. Xavier Tillman, who I really have liked in the last few games, and then Desmond Bane, who's just exactly what people said Desmond Bane was going to be. Grayson Allen's been hot lately. You look up and down their roster, no one is playing out of their mind. They're just kind of a solid team that makes you beat them, and not that many people have been able to beat them so far.
Yeah, by the way, as you said, they're not getting great shooting from guys who are better shooters than their performance right now. I mean, Brooks is one. By the way, I need an intensity guy like that on every team. By the way, the team is going to need better shooting at a certain point, right? They're going to need personnel that can just light it up. And maybe Brooks is that guy. I don't know. I think there is probably a ceiling. Bane, as you said, has been fascinating. I didn't see him at all in college. But like you, I'm sure there were people sort of whispering in my ear, watch this guy. And I was like, yeah, we'll watch this guy. They love Tillman. Boy, do they love Tillman. And look, obviously when Jackson gets back, there'll be reduced minutes, but rotation is starting to flesh out. They're going to have some money at a certain point. It will never be a glam destination, but it could be I think as an organization, these could be guys you want to play with, especially Morant, because he finds you, without a searchlight, in the dark, he finds you, which is pretty amazing. But I like it. Look, I'm not under any pretense. As I said, this is not a contending team right now. I'm excited to see what happens when Jackson gets back. I'm excited to see when guys actually like Brandon Clark start to hit shots every once in a while. But in the meantime, I just trust teams that know how to build defenses young and early, because it's that old thing. You're not going to get worse at that. And by the way, Jackson is not going to hurt you. And so, okay, it's 4th and 26 today. Then it becomes 4th and 18. Now you're a playoff team. You get up to league average. then frankly, it's the grit and grind Grizzlies, and you're going to be very good for a very long time. The difference is I think there's some dynamism on this team for modern basketball that team obviously did not have. So,
well, yeah, I mean, when you're talking about losing a point guard like Morant and losing a stretch big like Jackson, I mean, that's your entire offensive identity. It's frankly a miracle that they've been able to carve out an offense that isn't last in the NBA, given the leftover talent, because they don't take any threes. They're last in free throws. They just don't have anything resembling a player who really scares you as a defense, because the two guys who do that have been out of the lineup. And when you put them together, it's just an entirely different team. Like the team that exists right now, some elements of that will carry over. Certain players like Tillman and Bane have proven themselves, but it just becomes an entirely different team. So kudos to the Grizz. I have a soft spot for the Grizz. One more, the Grizz, that court they were playing on last night is so gorgeous with that deep wood in the paint. People need to check that out. It's beautiful. There was another Grizz point I wanted to make, but I forgot. I don't care anymore. Well, speaking of rotations fleshing out is a response you just gave. I know you want to talk about the Utah Jazz. I will indulge you 8 minutes on the Utah Jazz with the caveat that you could not use the phrase screen assists at any time in your analysis of the Utah Jazz. So with that being said, why are the Jazz currently 9-4, creeping up into the top 10 in both offense and defense and rolling? It's good we're talking about them. They're rolling a little bit. They are 9th in offense and 6th in defense. Why are they interesting to you right now?
Knowing my proclivities, this is going to come as no surprise. Mike Conley, who has been their best player. And I love this story. First of all, he's been asked to be a shooter, which most NBA players would receive with absolute enthusiasm. I think he had to kind of adjust to that role. We forget he's really good at organizing an offense. Just think about this. What he was able to do in Memphis over a series of years with no wings, with plotting bigs who didn't run the floor, other than freaking Costa Koufos. This constricted half court where every time he's, driving with his left, there's there's Zach Randolph hanging out on the block, and he ain't going anywhere. Right now, he can do things like get out in early offense. He can get a drag screen from Gobert and turn it into a lob dunk. He and Gobert are actually one of the highest volume pick and roll tandems right now in the league, and they're getting really good production out of it. And you don't think this guy knows exactly where and when, how to hit, Jordan Clarkson on a little stagger cut, moving downhill into the lane. It's like he's throwing fastballs, and these are half court possessions that are producing good looks in the paint. By the way, I watched a series of possessions where he and Jordan just kind of worked 2-man games. When Niang,
yes, they did that in the last couple of games. It's a little interesting. Conley Clarkson pick and roll is becoming a little thing.
Yeah, and you know who else is on the floor yesterday? Monday. We're taping this on Tuesday. Mia Oni, George Niang, and Rudy Gobert, and they are killing the Denver defense. Granted, it's the backup defense. With these half court possessions, the two of them just working. Clarkson coming off these curls, whatever it was. I love watching Conley in transition. It's easy to forget because the Grizzlies never ran. And there he is bouncing a pass behind him to Clarkson trailing, who finds Niang in the left corner where he actually can bury some shots. And this is stuff that good teams do with half of a starting unit. And really, I think there's only, with Gobert and Conley on the floor. And he doesn't take a lot of bad shots. And I think he's been their best player. And it's just, we're answering the question that we wanted to answer last season, which was, hey, what would the Jazz look like if Conley were healthy and well integrated into what they do? And we're starting to get that answer, by the way, with Mitchell not playing terribly well so far. Ingles is out. They're really feeling some things. Bogdanovich hasn't been as proficient as he was last season. He got off
to a start that made you wonder, is he all the way back from this wrist thing? Right. Even Gobert is down to 58% from the floor, which is not good for him. He had a streak of 2 of 7, 3 of 6, and 58% at the 49% at the line, which is one of those things where it's early, small sample size. You go 0 for 5 one game, whatever it is, it screws up your numbers. Just worth checking out in every Utah box score. How did he shoot at the line today? Same with, obviously Giannis is a much more well-documented one, but so interestingly on Conley and Gobert, when you said fleshing out a rotation, that was okay, we got to talk about the Jazz. Conley and Gobert have played 340 minutes together so far this year. Conley total has played 391. So one of the things that Quinn Snyder has discovered, and when you have a lot of ball handlers on your team, I think one of the challenges is finding the right flow and who should play with who and for how long and what do the stints look like. They seem to be, particularly when Ingles comes back and Oni will be out of the rotation, they seem to be figuring some things out. One of which is, let's bring Conley and Gobert in and out of games together for the most part. They're often subbed out in the first and third quarters together. Let's try to rediscover that bench unit that was killing people last year, which was Clarkson, Conley, Ingles, Niang, Bradley. Well, let's try to rediscover that, but with Gobert in Bradley's stead. And they're just sort of figuring out some things about their rotation. Mitchell will get rolling. Bogdanovich will get rolling. And it's time for me to do it. I have to do a mea culpa on Jordan Clarkson. I even knowing that toward the end of his stint in Cleveland, he had really changed his shot selection to have more shots at the rim, more threes, some relocation threes that we hadn't seen from him before. I still thought he was kind of an empty calories player, partly because he's not very good defensively. He just keeps on scoring for the Jazz. He just keeps on scoring. He's making threes, and he has this thing where he's like a skinny Diaw thing, where he just sort of worms his way in there, like spin, half spin, worm. All of a sudden, he's 3 feet from the rim, and he puts in some weird bank shot that gets over the fingertip of a shot blocker by a quarter of an inch, and it goes in. He's been one of the best bench players in the league since they got him. I remember going back and forth with some members of their brain trust when they made that trade about how I just wasn't a big Jordan Clarkson guy. They were right. I was wrong. Jordan Clarkson has been hugely important for their team. They do seem like a team that's figuring something out. And what I wrote about them before the season was, Mitchell is by far their best scorer. And I think sometimes their offense gets a little Mitchell-y, like they get out of what made them Utah and become the Donovan Mitchell show. And sometimes that's going to have to happen, frankly, against great defenses. They don't have a second guy. They don't have a Murray Jokic, LeBron Davis, Kawhi George. Can they sort of cobble that second guy out of Conley having a bounce back year, Gobert just rolling for dunks, Bogdanovich sprinkling it in, Clarkson doing it, and so far they're cobbling that guy. And I don't think, look, the three teams in the West that have separated themselves, not coincidentally, they haven't really been hit by COVID yet, are LA, and I think Utah at 9-4 is getting onto that list. And are they in the LA stratosphere yet? I think it's a little early, but they definitely are one of the puncher's chance teams.
Yeah, in some ways, I think Clarkson is an illustration of who they are and what they do. Because I think there are a lot of bench guys in the league where really there's a certain laziness to the second unit offense where it's like, hey, go out there and eat some innings. Just go out there and do what you do. Hey, this is a guy who'll like the role because he can kind of just, Lou Williams it a little bit. Although actually that's a bad example now because he became such a great pick and roll player. But I think, Crawfordy maybe is a better sort of an analog there. But Clarkson is asked to do things off the ball. Like, you're going to get shots within the context of what we do. Because as you said, Conley and Gobert are going to be on the floor. So Jordan Clarkson, like the truth is we're not particularly interested in you as an isolation player. We're interested in you working within the framework of what we do. Portis is having this experience, I think, in Milwaukee. And I'm not going to go back to Milwaukee, but I think there are these guys that we sort of decide they have a single facet to their game. They're crappy defensively because basically, they're in a lazy situation where very little accountability is charged, and maybe the roster's thin. So the temptation to use a guy who can, quote, create his own shot without holding him much accountable for those shots is kind of fine because we're just buying time till the other guys come back in. And I just think Utah they never lose the shape. Now, what's other interesting thing is they're now able to do more things. And I love Favors coming back in, right? Because now, Gobert doesn't present a ton of problems, but there are problems in a modern game. And I just love, Favors, first of all, kind of establishing himself is, look, he's not Gobert defensively because nobody is. But we can play up to touch with this guy. We can solve more problems when the game sort of demands that we solve those problems. I love that. And I just think they have a lot of competent ball players. Like, I watched O'Neal hit Niang on the skip pass off the dribble for a corner three. And it was just like, oh, this is what good teams do. I just feel like they're more, this is what good teams do moments in Utah Jazz basketball after years of, okay, how do we squeeze out some lemonade from this shit? right? Like we just don't have any shot creation. And look, it's not like they are shot creating extraordinaire, but I just feel like that manufacturing has gone from heavy to really agile. And look, at the end of the day, Zach, we might be talking about this as a really good second round team that loses to one of the big boys. And that's always sort of the Charlie Brown of the football with the Jazz. But there's great virtue in being that team, I think, in this
Hey, look, there's no guarantee they get there. I mean, that's life in the West. I mean, currently out of the top 8 in the West are Dallas and Denver at 6 and 7. Denver's just been strange all year. Dallas has half a team, so it's impossible to evaluate really anything that's happened in Dallas other than Luka seems to have found a groove until last night anyway. Like, it's just Phoenix is going to be solid all year. It's tough. It's just tough in the West. Let's talk about one more team before we let you go. Another team that is near and dear to both of us, I think. And a team that unfortunately is hard to really evaluate, but they are the defending Eastern Conference champions. Are you worried at all about the 5 and 7 Miami Heat, who are 22nd in offense and 23rd in defense? Jimmy Butler has played in 6 games, missed 6. Bam has missed 2. Tyler Hero's missed 2. Bradley's missed 5. Maurice Harkless, who was at one point they thought he might start for them, was completely benched until last night when they dusted him off for 30 minutes. Goran Dragic started last night after coming off the bench all season. Is there anything to read into this team? Or are we just sort of like they just got to get their guys and see?
Yeah, I mean, like you, I spent a lot of time on them coming into this podcast, and I, trying to discern patterns and is there cause for worry? Is there cause for don't worry about it? Obviously, the East is stronger, so you need a little more. But they're so confounding because they're shooting the ball well. And I mean, every one of their regular big minutes guys is shooting the ball well. They have a solid shot profile. Overall, they're not giving up a ton of great shots, though they are giving up a heavy volume of threes. They're average on the glass. It's not
which they did last year, by the way. They did the same thing. That's how they defended last year.
Right. And that's just what they do. Goran has been a whiz in the pick and roll. What's new? I'm having a hard time getting a handle on them. And there's even when you start looking at the non-Jimmy units that have played, I don't think any one of them, more than one of them, has played more than 3 different games, right? They had this atrocious first quarter Monday night when, I don't know, the Mason Plumlee abused them in every which way. But I had a hard time discerning patterns. Bam hasn't been great. They cough up the ball at ridiculous rates. But is that a pattern that worries me? No. That's what happens when teams aren't familiar with one another. When you have guys kind of stepping into roles that I think are eventually designed for them, but you're a little out in front of your skis. So in the sense that, do I worry that a full strength Miami team is going to be a below 500 team? I do not worry about that. I do worry that this is a 70 some odd game season. Lord knows how many we end up finishing. But you don't want this to become you don't want to start your season, and they really haven't started their season so late that you just can't hit stride at an optimal time. They are such a rhythm team. They are a team that does a lot, another turnover issues. They do a lot of interesting things, running that offense through Bam, which has not been, by the way, that's an area when you start measuring efficiency, sort of that Bam, as I always said, there's sort of 3 tent poles to what Miami does. And one of them is Bam offense. And that hasn't been as proficient. Then again, that might be an element of sort of not having the rhythm that you need to do that sort of stuff.
Bam's mid-range jumper is officially a thing to monitor. 26% of his shots this year have been long twos. That was only 9% last year. He's making 57% of them very early. Had some step backs last night. If that's a thing, again, in these games where everyone is out, you're just looking for stuff that can apply when you have your real team. That's a stuff. That's a thing that you can apply when you have your real team. The Dragic thing is really interesting because they seem determined to bring him off the bench, even though him starting last year was a big part of why they hit their stride. I think the Crowder departure has hit them a little harder than they anticipated, and they just don't know what their starting 5 should be. They're initially, do we want to have Jimmy we don't want to have Jimmy at the 4, but we can't have Goran, Robinson, who's playing great, by the way, Duncan Robinson, and Hero all on the floor together without having Jimmy on as the 4. Well, do we want to have Harkless in there, and then who do we bring off the bench? Do we bring Goran back off the bench and try Hero and Bam and Butler as sort of try point guards? Okay, let's try Olynyk. They don't have an answer to that question, but again, it's early, and they have been way, way better with Goran on the floor. And I think that's a data point I'm sure they're monitoring. They're +5 per 100 with Dragic on the floor and -9 per 100 when he sits. I'm sure they're monitoring that. But it's just, the turnovers are the product of they've just been missing so many guys. Bam is probably doing a little too much shot creation. Tyler Hero is probably doing a little too much shot creation. I think that will settle down. I do think there's a really good team in here still, and it's just a matter of can they get it? Can they literally get the players and find it? I mean, this is just how this season is going to be.
Look, in some of it's Occam's razor, which is Jimmy Butler, right? Like the sort of the heavy manufacturing by Jimmy Butler is one of those 3 tent poles to their offense, right? Goran's pick and roll game, Adebayo, at the high post, and Butler doing sort of the ISO work to kind of an individual pressure on the defense. And one of those 3 things isn't there. And it is a tent. Like, it's not a team. It is a team that requires great creativity. They have great creativity, but necessity in some ways was the mother of invention. Like, you needed to have sort of the disparate offense that does a lot of different things very well. And look, one of those things is missing. And but yeah, in fact, I got to tell you, I'm amazed that their shot profile has been as good as it is. I'm amazed that they have gotten the quality of shots. And that's what's so weird. It's like you look at the ranking and then you look at the shots. And maybe that's just the turnover is sort of the issue there. But yeah, I think it is. Look, let's see when Jimmy gets back. And it's an easy explanation, but I think it's the right one.
What happens when you get ahead of your skis? Do you fall on your face?
I hate skiing. I hate being cold. We've had this conversation.
I've never skied in my entire life. Ever. I don't want to ski.
We recently had this conversation. The Seinfeld.
Did you ever see No, it's Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Oh, Curb, that's what I
goes
meant.
Skiing, and he's like, that's how I would be. I don't want all this in my car. I don't want to carry all of it. I don't want to do any of it. And it's cold. I'm more of a sledder. I consider myself a skilled sledder. It is interesting. The Heat are 5-7. Maybe this is random. Maybe it's a product of all the disruptions that this season is foisting on teams. But it just feels like everyone is 500 except like 3 teams. No one in the East is better than 8-4. 8-4 is currently the best record in the East. That's Boston. Milwaukee and Philly are 9-5. Then New York is 6th at 7-8, and then it goes 6-7, 6-7, 6-8, 6-8, 6-8, 5-7, 5-8. In the West, you have the 3 teams we talked about: LA, Utah. Then everyone is either 2 games over, 2 games under until you get down to the Kings, who are so bad defensively that honestly, ESPN might be able to put together a team that could put up like 70 points per 100 possessions against the Kings. That's not very good, but the Kings are so inept defensively that it's actually kind of shocking. They're giving up 124 points a game. Do the Generals give up 124 points a game? What are the Globetrotters putting up? It can't be 124 points, is it? I haven't been to a Globetrotters game in like 30 years. Do they put up 120 every game against the Generals?
Are they still around? I mean, I loved them as a kid.
I assume they're still around, solving mysteries on Scooby-Doo, entertaining people everywhere. I assume that if I don't want to live in a world where there are no Globetrotters, of course they have to exist.
God, who are the new Scooby-Doo mystery solvers? Like, it was like Jonathan Winters and the Globetrotters. Like, who else was it? I don't know. Like, do they have a new generation of celebrity mystery solvers? I don't even know. I haven't watched an episode in years.
How did the Harlem Globetrotters get involved with that? This is what I want to do now. I want to go read a backstory. Who is the person who in the meeting was like, you know what? Let's get the Globetrotters on Scooby-Doo. Right. They seem like they would be good mystery solvers along with Shaggy. No one, only the nerd girl, Velma. She was the only one that was contributing anything to the enterprise of solving mysteries. The other people are just absolutely incompetent on Scooby-Doo.
Fred was a total showboat. And I think there was probably an exec at Hanna-Barbera who was just like calling up the talent agencies, like just getting on the phone with ICM and saying, who you got? Jonathan Winters, great.
Just they're not very good at the mystery solving is all I'm saying. All right. Although they seem to get it done at the end. Well, that's Heat, Jazz, Grizz, and the Brooklyn Nets, who are going to be a problem all season long. Again, this is just a weird season. Sometimes it's hard to think about what to talk about, but we can always talk about stuff with Kevin Arnovitz. Anything you want to, we got coming down the pipeline? Anything you want to promote before we get out of here?
Not yet. I'm sort of asking what teams are doing on the road to promote team building, since the road is where that always happens, and now you've got
Yes, I've heard tell of this project.
Yeah, but it's like nothing is the answer. Like nothing. I think people are not having a good time, which is, look, that's everybody right now. But like the number of people who said the NBA stopped being fun. Again, everyone says it with the disclaimer that we're not crying. I mean, everyone's got jobs, amazing jobs. You're staying in 5-star hotels, but like the league is fundamentally a fun place to work, and it has not been fun this year. It's waking up at 8 a.m. for tests, rather than, sleeping in until shoot around after a late night arrival. And no one's having fun. And the answer is no one's doing that. Like, guys, I had Danny Green tell me that because the entire coaching staff is wearing masks, like he really can't recognize them by face because he actually hasn't viewed them by face with this new team he's on, which I thought was really interesting. He's just like, you don't really know anyone yet. And, it'll be interesting to see what that does or does not do. And I don't know, man, it's a weird year.
Well, we will be on the lookout for that piece. Nobody does basketball traveling nexus like Kevin Arnovitz. Mr. Arnovitz, thank you again for your time. I'll see you soon.
We'll talk.
It's time for Difference Makers, which is brought to you by our friends at CarMax. Don't just buy a car, love your car with the new CarMax Love Your Car Guarantee. This week's Difference Makers, which always we're going to pick one of our 10 things we like and don't like. The difference maker, I guess, is LeBron James and the Los Angeles Lakers, because all the drama about James Harden, all the drama about all the other trade rumors in the league, the Lakers very quietly are still awesome. And they're kind of flying under the radar for a team that is first in defense and third in offense as I'm reading this. Their new starting five is plus a gazillion already, with Marc Gasol stretching the floor. They're just scratching the surface of what LeBron and Anthony Davis, two of the most threatening rim attackers in the history of the NBA, can do in all that open space. And with the scoring point guard and Dennis Schroeder, an ingredient they really didn't have last year. I mean, they had Rondo, they had Caruso, but they didn't have a guy who's looking to get his own shot, who can really bend the defense and make plays like Schroeder can. And you can tell they haven't really revved the engine yet. They're not quite coasting, but they're somewhere between coasting and full throttle. And when they get to full throttle, they're going to be damn good. Yeah, their defense is a little different. Marc Gasol is not quite the vertical player on either end of the floor as JaVale McGee or Dwight Howard, but his shooting and his sort of IQ and feel add a different kind of ingredient than they had last year. Montrezl Harrell is coming in and just wrecking stuff, getting to the free throw line, eating a lot of innings, eating a lot of minutes. And one of the other things that's going under the radar is all that depth is a difference maker in itself, because LeBron, he's not doing as much heavy lifting as he's had to do in previous years. His minutes are down, his pick and rolls are down, his scoring is a little bit down, and that's great. That's exactly what the Lakers should be aiming to do. They should be aiming to ease his burden. He's third. LeBron is third in the history of the NBA in minutes, and they should be aiming to ease his burden as he gets older. This has all the look of a team that is still the favorites to win the NBA championship, the favorites to repeat, and a team that is going to learn more about itself slowly but surely as the year goes on. And by the time the playoffs come, knock on wood, good health, they are going to be very, very hard to beat. So that is our difference maker of the week. Again, our thanks to CarMax. For more difference makers, check out my weekly 10 Things column on the ESPN Insider page.